A commando officer will never ask his men to do anything that he hasn't done himself. So said Lieutenant Colonel Vaughan, the commandant at Aknakari. The words rang in Carter's head as he crawled back to the edge of the cliff. Back in the barn, he had demonstrated the technique, just as his father had shown him all those years before. Straddle the rope, grip tightly with both hands, and walk backwards over the edge. The rope was in fact 30 toggle ropes joined together to make one long one, 180 feet in length. Carter hoped it was long enough. A lot of its length had been wasted in tying it to the trig point, which was several yards from the edge of the cliff. In this rain, the toggles would be useful, stopping his hands from sliding down and falling all the way to the bottom if he lost his grip. But it would have been better if he'd been able to provide the men with some practical experience, but that couldn't be done without giving the game away to the opposition. Fortunately, the cliff wasn't sheer. If he slipped and fell, there was some chance that one would actually kill themselves. Carter suffered from a fear of heights that his father wouldn't accept, making him climb mountains no matter how terrified he had been. At least in the darkness, Carter couldn't see the drop below him. It removed some of the terror. Slowly, he lowered away, taking one small step backwards, before relaxing his grip enough for his hands to follow, before tightening his grip again. About a foot of movement every 2 or 3 seconds, with an estimated 50 feet to the bottom. It should take about 2 minutes. It seemed like an age. Unable to check his watch, Carter tried counting the sound of his heartbeats thudding in his ears to gauge the passage of time, but it was no good. His heart was pounding at such a rate that he couldn't keep up. After what seemed like a lifetime, Carter felt the ground start to level off beneath his feet. He was at the bottom. Relaxing his grip one final time, he jerked the rope twice to indicate that he was safely down. His hands free, he was now able to draw his pistol, one man against half a troop if the alarm was raised. He had 6 bullets in the cylinder of his Mark VI Webley. It would be enough to make sure that he made some noise before he died, and that was about all. A body nudged against him as the next man arrived. Carter indicated to the left where the man should take up his position. "Don't stumble into the trench," he whispered into the man's ear. He thought he heard a stifled laugh, but it may just have been the man's boot sliding on the sodden grass. One by one, the men arrived, and Carter directed them left and right to form a skirmish line. They were coming down more quickly than he had anticipated. Clearly, some of the men were less nervous about the descent than he had been, or they were less aware of the danger. He was surprised that the men had been so quiet. He had expected at least one to slip and let out a curse, but it seemed that they were all as sure-footed as cats. The last man arrived, Sergeant Chalk. "Already up above," the sergeant breathed in his ear. Carter held out his hand, and the sergeant rooted around inside his battle-dress blouse, pulling out a clumsy, thick-barreled weapon. Carter pulled back the hammer, cringing at the harsh click as it locked into place. Pointing the weapon skywards, Carter pulled the trigger. After the silence, there was a deafening bang, and the flare streaked up to explode in a bright green light at the zenith of its arc. At once, the 4 Bren guns, positioned along the top of the cliff, opened fire. Carter passed the very pistol back to the sergeant, who reloaded it and fired it again. This time, a bright white light lit up the sky, illuminating the whole area. It hung there, apparently immobile, held aloft by its tiny parachute. It was only an illusion, of course. The flare had to obey the laws of gravity, but by firing flare after flare, the sergeant was able to keep the farm lit up for the Bren gunners to maintain their fire on the slit trenches.